Welcome to the Post-Industrial Podcast. I'm your host and the founder of Postindustrial, Carmen Gentile. We have a special guest this week, Gisele Fetterman. Gisele is an activist and advocate and the wife of the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. Gisele and I talked about COVID, joblessness, racial injustice, and her own experience as an immigrant coming to America. Take a listen to our conversation. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. We're here at the Hollander Incubator Space for Women. Tell me a little bit about it.
Sure, yeah. So this is a project of For Good. The Free Store is also an initiative under For Good. And, you know, we saw this need. We have these incredibly talented local women with great ideas who did not have a space to work out of. And we really believe in growing wealth from within the community. So this is a space, it isn't inclusive. It's only for Braddock residents. So all the ladies that work here live in Braddock and now have a business running out of this space.
So what kind of businesses from the women in Braddock are currently here now?
So we have a makeup artist who's busy nonstop. We have an eyelash extension person who, does esthetician work. We have a woman who does laser tattoo removal, and she does gang tattoos and sex traffic tattoos at no cost. We have a Black mental health specialist. They're just really different services and really incredibly talented.
So we're here in Braddock, PA. Braddock has gotten a lot of attention because of your husband's efforts here as mayor and now as lieutenant governor. You are not from Braddock. You are from Brazil. What's it like for somebody from Brazil to live in Braddock?
So I ended up in Braddock because I read about it and I learned that this was a city that had been essentially abandoned. 90% of the population left. And abandonment was a really unusual term for me. I had never seen anything like it in Brazil. I lived in big cities after, New York, had never seen anything like it. And I wanted to understand, how do you just walk away and leave behind your home, your things? And that's how I came to visit Braddock, because I learned about this. So, I adapt well. I'm really a kind of bloom where you're planted person. So it definitely is different than anywhere else I've ever lived. But I've always wanted to live in places that, just living there, you can be a part of a community and make it better. You
have your hand in a lot of projects that have to do with the betterment of communities and the betterment of people. You come from a background, though, you having immigrated from Brazil as a young girl, living in New York, and then I think Newark, right? How does all that play into your passion for these types of projects?
Sure, I think it's always questioning the idea of what has value, right? As an immigrant, as an undocumented immigrant for, almost 15 years, you go through this time where I felt invisible, I felt devalued, and I feel like there's so many people in places that carry that same stigma or that same feeling. And really overall, it's doing this work. It's like, who decides what has value? Who decides who has value? And Braddock was also a community that had been devalued and it had been abandoned, and people spoke badly of it. And it didn't deserve that. They had amazing people living here who were trying to make it better and were not willing to walk away. So I think the overall theme for my work, whether it's food rescue, whether it's a free store, it's challenging this idea and showing that there is value in places, people, and things that have been devalued.
You've just mentioned the food initiatives and this other initiative, the Free Store, where you help people with, household goods and other things they need?
Yeah, everything from diapers to formula to clothing. Moving here from a third world country and being shocked at the excess. America just threw everything out. And to an 8-year-old child, that was really shocking. We were dumpster divers. We saw firsthand the waste, and it didn't sit right with me. I wanted to do something to change that.
So what kind of buy-in do you have from those who donate? How do you acquire these goods?
So the Free Store's been around now for 9 years. So in the beginning, I used to hustle. I used to call places. I used to call retailers and ask questions. What do you do with last season's things? Summer just finished. What are you going to do with these things? And they would tell me it was going to go to the landfill, to the dumpster. And I asked, well, if you call me and I pick it up, can we do that? And we began these partnerships. Now they call us, and we've had enough coverage that companies from around the country will now mail things to us, which is amazing. But people that come, it could be their children are outgrowing things, and previously they may have dropped off at like a Goodwill box, and now they know there's an alternative.
You mentioned your kids, and we were talking previously about how in the home you're trying to get them to speak Portuguese, but they're not. They're a little bit reluctant. Personally, I was just telling you, I have a daughter who's half Croatian and half American. I'm trying to get her to speak more English. What's my technique for how to do that?
I don't know that I have the secret. I've been trying to find it, but I say to be an immigrant is to live with a broken heart. Everyone you love will never be in the same room at once. Challenges with languages. Half your family can't communicate with the other half. So these are just immigrant struggles, and I do hope that the constant music and exposing to culture and food and hearing me speak Portuguese, one day it will just click for them and they'll want to respond. I think the trick would be to just not give up.
Right. I will keep that in mind. Which brings me to a very important two-part question, and I wanted to find a place for this, and this is for my own selfish needs. One, is there a Brazilian community in Pittsburgh? And two, can you introduce me to them? Because
yes.
I would desperately like to meet
and
some
yes.
Brazilians. Okay.
Yes, and yes, we do. There is a great, and it's very connected, it's very well organized. We have Carnival, we have
Really?
Festa Junina, we have a Facebook group. There's two larger chain Brazilian restaurants, but there is also an independent one, Casa Brasil, which is in Highland Park, which is amazing. There is a samba studio in Etna. So yes, we aren't many. Maybe there's 300, with many being transients that are students or so, but they are very organized.
That's great. Wow. Well, that leads me to something that's a very hot topic in America, being immigration and being an immigrant. We're all immigrants. I'm third generation immigrant. You're a first generation. How has in recent years, the issue of immigration and the fight at the border affected your perception of the immigration process in the U.S.?
I mean, we have a terrible immigration process. I experienced it firsthand, when I came to this country. I would love to see a process that's led with compassion and looking at these folks as people, right? Right now, they're bargaining chips, they're numbers, they're statistics. But it's when I sit down and talk to people and share my story that I think that's when they can make a connection. I'll have people that will regularly say, "You're so nice and you do such great things. I don't have an issue with you. I have an issue with all the other immigrants." And that's when I can say, well, actually, who are the others? I was an undocumented person. They're like, well, you came the legal way. And I was like, no, I actually didn't. And I think here we have this idea in America that, parents will say, I would die for my kids. And everyone's like, wow, you're such a great parent. But you're not willing to move to somewhere they're safe. And I think with parents, I usually can win them over, what are you willing to do for your child's safety? And it gets them to think differently. But these are mostly folks that have a news channel on that's drilling these misinformation into their minds constantly, that you really have to break down that misinformation.
Well, in order to help break down some of that misinformation, I was wondering if you could maybe talk to me a little bit about your experience being undocumented as a child. What was that like, knowing that you had to keep a secret like that?
So, I was scared of every knock at the door. Every time there was a knock at the door where we were not expecting guests, it was like my heart would drop. And my brother and I would look at each other and it was like, it's over, right? We had these moments constantly. But also bigger things that I realize now as an adult, to me as a child, were just normal. Like we weren't allowed to play sports in school. I loved soccer, but I couldn't play because if I was injured, we were uninsured. There was no safety plan, right? These are things now as an adult. I broke my nose in gym class and I finally got it fixed 20 years later as an adult. And I didn't breathe well for 20 plus years. And these, Pennsylvania has almost 25,000 undocumented kids that are now going through the same challenges that I went through when I arrived to this country. And I don't know that it's getting better. I mean, you're hopeful, but I still see the same challenges today.
Your nose was broken for that long and then you just recently got it fixed. I mean, it's straight as an arrow now.
Yeah, I had a broken deviated septum and a collapsed nasal wall.
Wow.
That I just, I breathing a little funny, but there was no option. And it's this misconception that immigrants are draining the systems, the social service systems, they're draining welfare or housing, when the reality is undocumented immigrants have access to nothing. We paid full price for the house we rented. We never had health insurance, and it's almost like we actually help the system so much more because we pay into a system that we don't utilize or reap benefits from. And that's a big misconception.
It must be heartbreaking and frustrating for you to have heard over the last few years all this angry, ridiculous rhetoric about immigration and the immigrants who are, taking our jobs, who commit more crimes, when statistically we know that immigrants who are not documented across the board commit way fewer crimes because they're trying to remain under the radar.
Right.
I mean, what do you say as someone who's experienced that firsthand? When you hear this, I mean, how does you've dealt with your own frustrations as it pertains to people discriminating against you. What do you do? How do you handle that?
I've had to learn. I've had to learn coping mechanisms. A lot of it gets you really down and it's draining. And I have to remember that they were taught to feel this way. They weren't born feeling these things. And I try to hold some compassion, knowing that someone taught these thoughts. And if I can do my part to show that there's actually a different perspective and a very different reality, that's what I'll do. And that has made me a target because I've been so outspoken about my story and my journey. I joke that my husband is the elected official, but I get 10 times more hate mail than he does, consistently, simply because I was born in another country. So there's still a lot of challenges to overcome, but these otherisms are very much still around, that someone feels superior simply because by pure luck they were born in a place that you weren't, something completely out of your control.
You mentioned that, the immigrant experience, you being from Brazil. I lived in Brazil for a long time and I worked there, and every day I wake up, especially in the winter, and I'm thinking, why the hell am I not back in Rio de Janeiro right now? I mean, you made a good point earlier about having the immigrant experience, having that broken heart. How do you deal with that, knowing particularly now with what's happening in Brazil? Brazil is having a terrible time with COVID. They've got a leader there that's not acknowledging reality. He's ill-equipped to handle the situation clearly. First of all, how's your family there doing?
We lost, I lost my uncle who basically raised me. It was like a father to me. We lost him. I lost my aunt, and then I lost another aunt. So not only was my family directly affected, most families in Brazil have had to experience tragedy. And to see a leader who continues to make fun of it, there's videos of him joking about people being in hospitals for COVID. It's so heartless and so cruel. And I hate that that's our president.
But your family that has survived, they're still coping. Right now in Rio, cases are still really bad. Are they having to stay at home? Are they masking? Or what are they doing?
Yeah, Brazil is still fully masked. Schools aren't back to normal yet. It's very different. We talk every day, WhatsApp. And kind of following the trajectory of both places and how things changed very quickly once leadership here changed, and it's just a hope that Brazil's next to get him out of office.
Well, speaking of office, your husband's going to be running for Senate here in Pennsylvania in 2022. What's it been like so far since he's made that announcement?
It's great. I get to travel the state and meet people, meet amazing people and, get to know different towns and, be received really well. So it's always a toll on the family, of course, because we have 3 little kids, but you have to believe that, this is all for something better and bigger.
And what do you see as your role in this campaign?
I don't know that I have an official role. I'm second lady also, so I have my unofficial duties, I suppose, as second lady. But, if I can tell stories, if I can highlight Pennsylvanians and their lives and their needs, kind of amplify that, then that's something that I take very seriously.
What are people telling you that their needs are? What are you hearing on the campaign trail?
So, I was the ambassador for the census, so I got done this big tour around the state, making sure that we can count people, right? And reminding them that they're important and their voice matters and they need to be counted. But across the state, pandemic really has affected families. Many families still haven't recovered, whether that's housing, whether that's racial concerns, whether that's any number of things. I get to hear those conversations, and not only immigrant families, but all Pennsylvanians. And ultimately, our struggles are very similar, even though our stories are so different. Everyone just wants to, have a good life and raise their kids and live somewhere that's safe. Gun violence is a big topic always. You see Philly had quite a spike in violence, Pittsburgh as well. Ultimately, everyone just wants to get through life and have a safe trip through it, So the stories aren't that different as we grow across the state.
Do you think that having spent time in a community like Braddock, which has had its share of struggles, it's had decades of struggles, has helped you to better understand that struggle in other parts of the state?
Yeah, I was food insecure. We were dumpster divers. We were never rich by any means, and I like to think I've had varying experiences as a resident of Pennsylvania and previously New York, that my experience is very different maybe than other historic second ladies or Senate spouses. And I think that adds a great richness. I'm very grateful for the experiences I've had. It's allowed me to be creative and look for solutions, and I don't think I would have had that if I had a different story.
What are some of those solutions? Because food insecurity now, it's been a problem for quite some time in the U.S. I can't remember the exact statistic, but far too many children are going to school hungry. Mm-hmm. And that's only been exacerbated during the pandemic with people being out of work. Besides food pantries like 412 Food Rescue and other ways, what are the solutions? I see there are community gardens here. That seems to be another way in which people can have access to fresh food where they don't have a grocery store nearby. Like what are more of these solutions that we need to be looking at?
So it's policy. I was always very like, I don't like politics, right, for years. And then I was like, wait, all the projects I created are filling voids that policy has failed. So, the free store exists because of policy failures. 412 Food Rescue exists because of policy failures. If we run legislative that could change that. I'm working with some legislators on enacting food waste laws. 412 Food Rescue exists because there's food waste. If we had policy in place that prevented that, we wouldn't need to exist.
What's a food policy waste prevention law? That's
so
interesting.
France and Massachusetts and other places have enacted laws where a restaurant or a grocery store is not allowed to throw out perfectly good food. They must be matched with a recipient, whether that's a nonprofit or a shelter or a pantry. So it eliminates all that waste. 40% of food in America is wasted. That's a direct disconnect when we have 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 food insecure. And those laws would tighten that, would decrease that, and it would create partnerships to avoid a lot of that. So there's always a better policy for most of these things. But a minimum wage, we need to increase the wage. We have families living on $7.25 when we know they can't live on that, and they rely on social services to be able to make ends meet. That would be an immediate change that would make things better. So, those are some things we hope that John could make change on and actually make things better for families here.
Well, your experience, you mentioned being food insecure as a child, and also your immigrant experience definitely lends to that, credence to that effort. I remember from my time living in Rio, I lived in a very nice part of Rio. I lived in Ipanema, right on the water. It was beautiful. But there were kids living in the sewer. Mm-hmm. They would go into the manholes, and that's where they would stay at night. And I'm not saying that we're on the verge of that in the U.S., but you can't discount the idea that some kids are going to be, the fact that we have children who are going to bed hungry is just unacceptable.
Anywhere in the world.
Anywhere,
and I think there's this indifference, right? There's this like global indifference because they're so far away or they're not our neighbors or our kids. But, I'd love to see a shift where there's global solidarity, where we recognize that, our poverty in America certainly looks different than poverty does in Brazil. But no one should be living in poverty. These are things that we can fix and we can do better. And I think we have to acknowledge that instead of looking away.
Yeah. It's we have a crisis of reality that we're facing right now in America as it pertains to not just our politics, which we clearly cannot agree on, but in terms of things like food insecurity. This is a very important issue. You would think that it would be the most important issue, but for some it gets backbenched by the political shouting and all the rhetoric.
Or the millions putting into voter suppression when we had 4 cases of fraud, right? But now millions are putting in to make sure there's no more fraud, even though there are 4 cases where we have families who are hungry. Or, it's a logic that I really struggle to understand.
You might be a little too young to remember the dictatorship in Brazil. You were probably like I don't want to date you, but exactly.
Very young. Very young.
You came to the U.S. in 1990 when you were 7 years old, so it was already transitioning back to democracy. But there was that period there where strongmen leaders took over for democratically elected ones, and under the guise of we're going to bring law and order, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. A lot of the rhetoric that we hear coming from rabid right-wing Republican leaders and their followers. What do you have to say to folks having come from a place where that type of leadership existed and did a terrible job and suppressed the will of the people? Tell me that
you don't want this here. Educate yourself, read, watch more channels than just one. Talk to people who look different than you and believe in different things and have different experiences. That's the reality. It's not something that one channel, spews on you. I had an experience at the free store, which was a veteran who came, and we literally fed him, right? So we provided him with all these meals, and then my mom called me, and I took the phone in Portuguese. He heard me speaking Portuguese and came over and said something really nasty relating to immigrants, even though I had quite literally just fed him, right? And I don't always have an opportunity to have a conversation with someone that may be unreachable. And I asked him, can you talk to me why you think this way? Tell me. And he said, ultimately, that he came back from war and he could not find a job. And my people were taking his job. And, I asked what he watches and what he reads, and we kind of went back and forth, and it was a nice conversation, draining, but nice, and it did end with an apology, and we hugged it out. This was, very rare. This doesn't always happen, but I think we have to be willing to talk to people who maybe completely feel differently than we do. And it's not always going to have that outcome. I've had outcomes that did not turn out like that, but sometimes it does, and we have to be willing to try, or we're just going to continue to write each other off and grow further and further apart.
The fact that you're from Brazil and your husband is from the U.S., and let's just be honest, you cut a very distinct, different figure from one another. He's this big gargantuan guy with a beard and a shaved head, and you're smaller and long black hair. And that alone speaks to the ability of people from different backgrounds to find common ground.
You just have to be willing to talk and to listen, and it's much easier than we all want to make it out to be. We can all find something that we agree on, and the things that we don't, we can challenge each other, but it can be done in a way that's not mean or cruel. We can have conversations, and I think that has changed, and I hope we get back to that. But right before the pandemic, John did a 67 county listening tour for legalization, where he was in these rooms, and I went to many of them with him, with folks who felt completely different about legalization. Some were completely against it, some were very much for it, and they all were together in the same room asking questions, saying, I support it because of this, I don't support it because of that, and it was civil, and it was so normal and so nice, and everyone left those rooms learning something. And I feel like we couldn't do that today. I don't know that would work today, but it did work then. And I'd love to get back to that, where we can be in a room where we disagree and we learn something from each other. I can dream.
You mentioned the legalization of marijuana. You are a big proponent for full legalization in Pennsylvania, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What are the obstacles to full legalization here in the state of Pennsylvania?
Republican legislators. That's it. The people overwhelmingly support it, including Republicans. They overwhelmingly support it. It's the legislators that won't.
Why?
You know, I sit around and think about that, because if I was elected to represent a group of people and the group of people is telling me we support this, I would be their voice, right? I think they don't want to admit that maybe they were wrong on it. I don't know. I can't think of another reason. They're looking away millions of dollars of investment in their state. They're looking away relief for their constituents. They're looking away from racial justice, and they're still against it. So that's the only thing I can think of, is they don't want to say, hey, we evolved, or we were wrong on this. Let's make it right.
Do you think maybe some of their constituents back in these, especially in rural counties in Pennsylvania, are telling them, hey, don't do that, even though it would probably serve their interests to be able to grow?
I mean, there's probably a small percentage of that for sure, but you know, this was voted on through these tours, and people filled out forms, and overwhelmingly was supported across the state, red and blue counties.
So are you hopeful that it's going to change anytime soon?
I'm hopeful it will change when the elected leaders change.
So would that be do you think that would be a top priority?
I mean, it needs to be. You know, I think we spend all this money and time in things that don't make things better. And, you know, if we've shown historically that money is available for priorities. And if we were to prioritize the things that were important, we'd have money to do so.
What would you tell people who are skeptical about it, not just from a policy standpoint, from an economic standpoint, but from a usage standpoint about medical marijuana? I have a prescription for medical marijuana, and I was actually hesitant to get it because long story, but I used to drink when I was younger and I don't anymore. So I was a little worried, am I gonna, but I thought it would be useful for me, help me sleep, help me with a lot of other things. What's the convincer that you think makes it?
I think the reality is people are using weed. Like, they are using cannabis right now in your state, your children, maybe your friends, your uncles, they're using it now. But right now that money is going into the streets, and 20,000 residents every year are going to jail, and they're accruing a record that's going to make them harder to be employed, harder to find housing, harder to volunteer at their kids' school because of these 20,000 new weed charges every single year. And legalizing it isn't going to make anyone use more or use less. It's going to take it out of the shadows. It's going to make it safer. It's going to make it, you know, you're going to get a substance that it's not a street substance, that you don't know what's in it. And this idea that whether you use it or don't use it, that you are okay with 20,000 new people going to jail every year for something that's legal in many other states around you, it seems really selfish.
It seems to me, and this is historically as well, there's a racial component against legalization, because a disproportionate number of people of color are the ones that are getting arrested.
Right, even though they use it at the same amount as none.
That's horrific.
It's horrific, and to be okay with that, you're complicit.
God, that just annoys the shit out of me. It's like, give me a second. That's infuriating, isn't it? It's just infuriating.
It is, and there's like 30 things that fit that infuriating, which is why, like, as hard it is campaigning or running for something, you do because you hope that you can change these things that infuriate you to make life better for everyone in this state.
You seem very even-keeled, though. How do you maintain your composure with all these infuriating things?
You know, I try to remind myself that these folks are, you know, the result of their environment and their education and their upbringing, and I was raised in a home that was accepting, and I was loved, and there was no shortage of that. And my grandma, before she passed, she says, Gisele, you give love because that's all you have inside of you, but not everyone has that inside them. And that, for me, was a great perspective, right? Like, people that are putting out these kind of hateful, ugly things, that's what they were taught or learned or believe, and that's inside of them. And I'm grateful I don't carry that inside of me, and that inspires me to keep working to change that.
So to quote the Beatles, love is all you need?
Yeah, I mean, I cry a lot too, but maybe that's my balance.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure.
Yeah. I want to thank Gisele Fetterman for joining me on the Postindustrial Podcast, and I want to thank you for watching. If you want to hear the rest of our conversation, go to postindustrial.com and look under Postindustrial Podcast. Thanks again, and take care.